Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly fireside chat. I'm your host, Prayag. I'm the CEO of Marvin. Marvin is a qual research platform being used by thousands of teams from around the world, including Microsoft, Twilio, SP Global, Simon Kucher and Partners, and Lattice. This is a platform that we have built. It's built for researchers and designers, by researchers and designers. And thank you for being with us today. A few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. If you have any questions, please drop it in the chat. Please drop it in the Q&A. I will definitely get to them. Our host today is Claire. Claire Rowell is a UX research manager at Lattice. She is passionate about making work human through actionable insights and human-centered design. I met Claire when she was the first researcher at the tech unicorn Lattice. Lattice, if you folks don't know, is an HR tech unicorn. Claire was their first UX researcher, built the foundation, championed the importance of research with senior leadership, established a really research-focused culture for the company, and has grown the team a lot since then. So thank you, Claire, for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, thank you, Prayag. It's been an incredible journey. When I think about like a year and a half ago, us jumping on a call to like meet, chat about potential tools, talk about what I was trying to get my head around doing at Lattice. And you've been a great thought partner, and it's been really great to partner with Marvin and use Marvin at Lattice. So excited to be here and share what I've learned throughout this crazy journey.
Yes, this has been your journey has been, very inspiring, not just for our product, but also for our team. It's a story that I like to tell, a lot of people, because this is a journey that a lot of people take. Being, research is still being established as one of the foundations of design in companies around the world. So it's a journey that a lot of people take, a lot of people will take, whether that's in a team, in a large company, or whether in a small growing company. So I am really excited for you to look back and share your journey. But before we do that, I would love to go a little bit further back. Your title at your previous company, which is WeWork, was workplace anthropologist, which is a shout out to your foundation in anthropology, which I love. But quickly, could you just tell me a little bit about how you got into research, and what did you do before you joined Lattice?
Yeah, let's go way back. I love this question. So yeah, the interesting thing about anthropology and the badge that I wear proudly in various titles that I've held is that it is truly about observing and understanding those around you. And in the world we work in the corporate and product development environment, making that actionable so that we can make products, services, experiences better. And I think we're really, like, as anthropologists, as folks who are coming from social science disciplines, like standing on the shoulders of giants. There are so many incredible thinkers in the UX research field that come from anthropology and social science. I'm particularly passionate about learning from them and being able to apply really those like people and soft science skills to what can sometimes feel like a very hard and technical craft in product development. So I think it's a particularly like exciting and different backgrounds to come from. And certainly there's no like one pathway in UX research. I mean, Prayag and I joke that you don't necessarily go and get like a degree in UX research, but there's so many interesting interdisciplinary thinkers, and it's really ours as a practice to shape and define. And so I actually, like, going all the way back, I really have always taken that anthropological lens to everything that I do. I actually started my career in HR as an HR intern and was like really interested in people stuff and really passionate about how do we take, again, that application of anthropology and apply it to business, organizational culture, making things, making experiences for people. I very quickly realized that HR was not for me, and I enjoyed kind of building and tinkering a little bit too much. So I moved over into a kind of niche field called workplace strategy, which was all about how do you make the physical design of the workplace, the experiences and services of the workplace actually work for employees. And so I was literally walking the floors of trading floors in financial services companies. I was sitting down with employees and doing interviews, all to help them make their workplace experience better. So that was kind of early days. And then at the time, there was this little co-working company called WeWork that was building out a co-working service offering, and also thinking about how do they make spaces and experiences for bigger companies. And I had some of that experience. So I came over to WeWork and was part of their kind of research and consulting team, helping to take lessons learned from how people use physical spaces, how they use digital services, and make the WeWork platform better for big companies. So again, it was kind of taking that really those ambiguous questions, a lot of those diverse methods, and bubbling it up into actionable insights for people who make things. And that was an incredible journey, but I felt like you could only make so much impact in the physical realm or the physical digital realm. And I really wanted to understand, how do you really impact the digital product development lifecycle? And also there's this whole world of like HR systems and processes and tools that I wanted to tap back into. And Lattice was at the time like a 150-person company, extremely focused on the mission of making work meaningful. So it felt like this really nice intersection of both my kind of passion for the world of work and taking those foundational anthropology skills and applying them in like a more traditional tech setting. And so it's been an incredible journey to this moment.
I love when people work with, physical spaces and physical items. Like, it's one of those kind of, one of my favorite courses back in design school was a tangible interfaces class, where we were like actually like building stuff, walking the floor, like looking at spaces. That's I think is a unique perspective that not a lot of people have. But you're right, moving in from physical to digital, just the scale of impact at a company like Lattice, which has been growing incredibly well, obviously was growing incredibly fast when you joined. You can scale that impact a lot with the digital products. So you've kind of taken a path. You were an anthropologist, you were in HR for a little bit, and you became joined WeWork. And now you're hired by Lattice, and you were their first researcher. And I remember getting on a call with you and Jazak, who was the chief product officer. What was the role as it was pitched to you, and how has that changed? And was the pitch accurate, or was it something different? Like, so take us back to the first few days of Lattice, and before you joined and right after you joined.
Yeah, I'm especially probably tuned to pitches that that either don't pan out or do pan out. And I really was looking for a company that was really invested in their employees and had a really aligned like leadership team who was extremely customer centered. And I felt that so much in my interview process, Jazak being a great example of that. And the other thing that was really interesting to me was there was this I love doing things for the first time. And there was really this sense of like experimentation and learning and being scrappy that I felt at Lattice, and it was very much true when I got there. And this kind of openness to learn and evolve. One of Lattice's values is clear eyes. And so like, if there's something that you're learning that like changes the direction, that's okay, right? If we committed to a goal and hey, we learned something new, let's evolve. And so there was already that kind of like experimentation mindset. And then the other thing that was interesting was I was hired by Jared, who's the head of design, and he was employee number 3. So there was this kind of like design at the center. ethos. And it was very common for the founder, Jack, the co-founder, Eric, and Jared to be like getting on calls with customers all the time. I mean, we are a B2B and we serve HR people. HR people love talking about people stuff. So we do tend to have that like natural alignment with our customers. But anyway, there was already that kind of natural customer conversation happening in the product development cycle. And so what I was really hired to do was work with this team of 5 designers and maybe like 7 to 10 PMs and bring a little bit more formality and rigor to the research process, really help arm folks with tools and frameworks for how to do research. The other interesting thing was the designers that had been hired, and Jared had been the head of design, had been really intentional about this, already kind of spiked in the like understanding space. So they were, it was already quite a lot of design thinking happening, it was not uncommon for product designers, product managers to get on calls with customers. So there was a solid foundation, but what was really needed was, hey, how do we like build more confidence around that? How do we bring the user more regularly into our design process? How do we broadcast research learnings and across not just product and design, but also engineering? There was a ton of hunger on that side. How do we connect the dots? There's just so many experts, especially in B2B. You've got sales and CX and all these different folks talking to customers all the time. How do we connect the dots and make that learning kind of synthesized and more actionable for the development teams? So that was a little bit of what kind of my initial remit was and why I chose Lattice. And all of that has been true and a lot more.
So you said you were 5 researchers, about 7 to 8, 5 designers, 7 to 8 PMs, and about 25 engineers. Is that approximately? That was kind of the product and engineering team, the PD team that you walked into. Do you think you were brought in at the right time? Do you think you were early? Do you think you were late? Do you think when do you think is the right time to bring in a dedicated researcher in the organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is like the hot question. And I don't have like an exact rule of thumb, but I think a lot of it's around where is the maturity of the product and design teams. So, like the team itself wasn't that big. Their maturity was that they were regularly getting on calls with customers. They already had that hunger and that desire. And so it made sense to, hey, let's have someone who's fully dedicated around that. And I think that like, when you don't have that interest and hunger, it may make sense to bring it in a little bit later once teams have started to like grow so big that they no longer themselves can be really owning the customer voice and they need someone to do that themselves. So I really think it depends on where your product and design and even engineering maturity is, and then like thinking, okay, when does it make sense to bring a researcher on?
Got it. I think it would be the opposite. Because if the team is already talking to customers and talking to users, then maybe you could delay the hiring of a dedicated researcher because at least those activities are happening. But I think your opinion is if that's happening already, you need to provide the scaffolding and infrastructure for those conversations to be happening in a much more organized way where learnings can be trusted. They should be, easily shared. Like, people should have, bringing, scaffolding and infrastructure for those conversations. That's also important, and that's probably even more important in an organization where conversations are happening. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think a researcher can push these conversations if they're not happening, or do you think that's more, an organizational DNA?
Yeah, I think that is an interesting point, and I would say that it really depends on like, there's only so many mindsets that a designer PM can be in at one time, right? And a lot of times you sort of have like diminishing returns when they are focused on so many different things at one time. And there tends to be like natural leanings of designers, of PM. So if you choose to stack your design team early on with a bunch of like kind of folks who spike in understanding, who love like that early thinking and getting in front of customers, understanding their needs, testing those needs or testing those concepts, then like, great, you can probably get a little bit further without having a fully dedicated researcher. Versus if you want to really like dig into craft and like the refining and some of the like design, like the really specific aspects of design craft, then you're more likely to need a researcher early on. So I also think it just depends on like, what are your intentional and strategic hires from a PM and design perspective early on? What do you want them to focus on? And then how does that impact where research makes the most sense? I also think that like, I mean, this is maybe a hot take, I don't know, but I think there's never not a good time to bring on a researcher. I think that part of what we do as research, like as an anthropologist, right, you were an observer. And the part of that challenge is that wherever you go, you always feel like a little bit of an outsider, right? I think as researchers, we're often like the only ones in the room. We feel like maybe we don't fully belong. And in fact, like that actually can be used to your advantage, right? You're a little bit different. And so like a lot of the first early work is to identify where does it make sense for you to embed, just like an anthropologist would. Where does it, what are the needs of the team? It helps you get into rooms you might not otherwise be in. And then use that to deliver even more impact. And so I think that like part of what the first researcher does is comes in and like actually understands where are the needs and spends that, like is able to be that excellent and fairly quick observer to really keenly see, this is a place for me to have impact. And I think those early projects really set, and those early observations really set the tone and direction for building a 0 to 1 movement around research and building a culture of research at the company.
That's a great point. And this is actually a topic there's a bunch of questions here, a bunch of comments here. I think Peter mentioned that, there's, when you're a first researcher, you're doing a lot of, if I'm reading this correctly, you're doing a lot of coaching, you're doing a lot of guiding the PMs and the designers that are already there. So you probably need to have that guidance mindset as well. The question that came up, that's a really, really interesting question, and something that I've been hearing about in the industry. Are you ever concerned, and were you ever concerned that product and design would kind of cannibalize the process, that if you teach them all of these skills early on, then the team, the company would not invest so much? Because your research team grew, right? Like now, how big is the research team at Lattice? Like 7, 8 people?
Yeah, 8 people.
Something like that? 8 people, wow. So your team grew 8x in like a year, a little over a year, right? Were you ever concerned, because you were always invested in democratization of the process, you were always invested as a first researcher, and initially finding those opportunities and observing kind of where the help is needed. But I think you also were building out the toolkit, the tool set, the coaching. Were you ever concerned that if you invested in democratization early on, the company would just not invest in research anymore, and would just have like designers and PMs kind of do all of the research?
It's a really good question. And I think it's a both and approach. So I wouldn't say that I came in and just invested in democratization.
Right.
I actually really tried to find intentional projects and a team that really needed me, and and basically figure out what is the case study that will build energy and excitement about what like a really impactful research project can be. And you're basically trying to create an audience and a hunger for this broadly. And so, yes, I was like maybe 30% of my time was focused on like, how do I coach? How do I build that mindset? What are some quick and easy tools that I can develop that can make and really impact the lives of designers and PMs, but also like, what is the team where I can go embed myself, really understand the rhythms and rituals of that team. I mean, so very tactically, like I'll tell you that the first thing that a big learning for me was when I first got to Lattice, I was trying to do like a very foundational project, and it was focused on like, what are the jobs of like customers across the platform? And what I very quickly learned was that like PMs and PDs were moving like very quickly. They wanted things that were very actionable to them. And like for the majority of where we were as a EPD org, it just didn't make sense to be doing something that kind of foundational and somewhat like abstract. And people didn't really know like what to do with it, which understandably makes a lot of sense. So what actually made more sense for me to do was to find a team that really needed my skill set and really could benefit from like some deep discovery. And so we were building out a new compensation tool. It was like a 0 to 1 initiative. So I actually embedded myself in the work of that team. That became like an incredible case study that I could, share around, that was memorable, that people were like, oh yeah, like Claire and the UXR team created those slides and that thing. And like, there was language that was being used for the first time. Like we created this concept of maturity, and like that started to make its way across the company. So it was very much this kind of like, find an opportunity, do really good work, build that case study, see what starts to resonate and what people are energized by, share that around, find your champions, and then figure out like where that next big thing could be. And so that's kind of your early days of building that momentum, such that people just don't necessarily know what it is you can do, right? So you have to create that case study. And then on the side, you're saying, okay, what of the things that I'm building in this high impact case study can be leveraged to empower other teams, to democratize the work, because I can't be everywhere at one time. So I think the big learning for me was like, find something actionable that has high impact, that is a case study that's used around the organization, that builds champions and future, and like creates the hunger for it in other places, rather than trying to just focus fully on democratization or do something very foundational that no one knows what to do with.
That's a great point. So it's kind of, as a first researcher, you're almost doing two things. You're building that, you're kind of trying to understand the rhythm, the motion of the research, that the conversations that are already happening. Find, hey, where is it that I can do this case study that quickly showcases the value of research, research with a capital R, research that's done by a researcher, but use that as a way to also build foundation for the rest of the team to be able to do their own research, because you can't as a first research cannot be everywhere. So doing taking this two-pronged approach as a way to first, help a team build something impactful, and use that as a way to drive the culture and the infrastructure and the tooling needed for everybody else to be able to follow suit. That's a really, really good point. But that kind of leads to this the next round. There's a question coming from someone in the audience. Monique asked, how do you, if you're the first researcher and you're working on this one project, and you already have one project, and I'm using it as a way for case study, I'm also building the scaffolding, how do you set the expectation as saying like, hey, this is going to be my project for the next, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 1 month, quarter? How do you set that expectation and draw boundaries in an organization that might have, a lot of work that needs to be done? So how do you make sure that, you are setting the right expectations up front, and not being pulled in a lot of tactical studies or tactical projects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think that first of all, like, acknowledge that you're going to make mistakes, and like that's okay, and that means that like you'll be standing up somewhere and telling these stories in the future. So I think allow yourself some room to make mistakes and to adapt and learn, right? So I think that a big part of this is setting the expectation that as a new practice, you are going to be experimenting to understand what are the needs of the teams. A lot of this is like different organizations have different cultures, right? And so some are going to spike more extremely data driven, and others are going to be like very comfortable with fast, iterative, scrappy, qualitative research. And so you're trying to understand like where is there going to be receptivity to this? I think in terms of setting and then being really comfortable being open and honest and pivoting where needed. I think part of it's also just like setting expectations point blank. One of the things that I've been known not to do is like to come to some sort of decision, but then not share it. And then there's questions, and then there's ambiguity. So just don't allow there to be ambiguity, right? So one is like obviously align with your manager or your leadership champion that you think that this makes the most sense. This is where you should focus. This is the project you've identified. Be clear on what those trade-offs are and why. Be open that you will get a month into this and retro and figure out maybe it doesn't make sense to continue with that, and have that room to adapt. And then share out that clear roadmap with everyone. So another big thing is just like transparency around the roadmap, transparency around your priorities. It could be a short email, it could be a full road mapping template. One of the early things we did was just like identify how we prioritize work and have a transparent roadmap that we could point to. And that way it just helped like remove any ambiguity, level set on expectations, and then give you the opportunity to follow up at any point and say like, actually priorities have changed and we're going to focus here. We've learned this and we're going to focus there. But you need to at least like set that expectation and share it. And oftentimes we forget to like share the expectation broadly.
That's a great point. No, it's setting that expectations. It's making sure that everybody knows that this is what we are going to try and achieve in the first month, and it's okay. I'm new here. I'm going to maybe there'll be maybe we will make some mistakes, but we'll learn together, and I'll share my learning as a team with everyone. That's a really good point.
And I was just add one more point, Prayag, which is it can be feedback. It can be easy to like be sensing a lot of different things early on. I mean, a big thing is like everyone's going to be asking you for stuff. Everyone's going to be like, there's going to be a million fires. And so the thing is like having more structured ways to understand needs, whether it's like a survey, and be able to see those like in slightly bigger picture rather than just like one-off requests. And then also be able to say like, how impactful are the specific things that I'm doing? And I think, again, that goes back to like thinking about the 0 to 1 of building a research team as a research exercise. And so I think take that research mindset to, it's kind of meta to the act of building a research team, and you're getting that feedback, then you're also more likely to be course correcting along the way.
So that means it's great that you were an anthropologist, because you were almost kind of studying this organization. So it's a meta research that you're doing and trying to understand where does research fit in, and how do you kind of fit yourself in that organization. So when you are in your case, you had a champion in an organization already, and Lattice is obviously such a, it has always been a very customer focused organization. I've known the founders for a very long time. They're always very focused on talking to the customers. Jared, obviously, very research oriented. So you probably had like your pick of champions, and Jay-Zach joined, Jay-Zach's chief product officer, who was very customer focused. So you had your pick of champions that you could kind of work with to elevate this, the voice, set expectations, elevate the voice of the user, elevate the voice of the research. Who do you think is the right champion though? Like, was it just an accident that Jay-Zach became kind of the person involved with us, or Jared became the person kind of championing it? Is it your manager? Is it the chief product officer? Is it somewhere in the middle? Who's the person that you should be working with to champion research when research is early on in an organization, a team?
It's another good question. And I think that there's no I think it's hard to talk about it in the abstract. I actually think it's more helpful to speak about champions in more specific ways. And so I think you do want to take, no matter what, a bottoms up and tops down approach. It's like any change management, right? You want to be building boots on the ground champions through the work. And I mean, Marvin's been a great partner for that in terms of like being able to quickly pull together what we already know. There's so much existing knowledge in organizations, being able to leverage that existing research, parallelizing research so that you're like answering real questions needed from the teams quickly and unblocking them, while also bubbling up those larger and more strategic learnings up to your, let's say, mixture of chief product officer, like head of design and head of engineering. And I think also, bringing the teams into the work. We have like a awesome UX research calendar where we broadcast our research calls, and we do we live stream them. And then I think, as much as possible, even bringing folks into synthesis, right? Synthesis is a really important part of the research journey. And so really opening up that process. So that's very much like kind of how to bring your stakeholders kind of from the bottoms up. And I think from the tops down, it is about bubbling up those insights that are slightly more strategic, but can actually point the business in the right direction. So I think it really is like making sure you're not just quickly answering the immediate needs of the team, but also saying, okay, if I put myself in the like mindset of JZAC or Chief People Officer, Head of Design, like what are they interested in, and how are you tying together what you're learning and pulling that up? So you should always be thinking about both of those needs. And again, and that's also just like naturally how you can structure your research projects. Also, like I think how as researchers we tend to think about things.
Got it.
So I guess like your actual question was like, who should you choose as a stakeholder? I think it's
seems like you don't choose. It seems like you basically broadcast and you try to bring everyone in, and that almost kind of bubbles up the champion, the people that are going to be involved in.
Right. And I think a big part of that is also like thinking like a marketer, right? Like we need to be loud, and we need to share learnings that are not just interesting, but actionable and relevant to all levels, right? And so it is about turning that corner. And so thinking like that marketer, broadcasting that work, and then like seeing what sticks, right? What are people responding to? Where are you getting a lot of follow-up asks? Who is asking for that? So it's almost like you put that prototype, that stimuli out there, and then you get reactions rather than trying to do a bunch of ambiguous conversations to build champions around like unknown work. Like I think it is about that kind of putting one foot in front of the other, doing a thing, and then seeing what gets a reaction.
Got it. And that's where the voice of the user can come in so handy, like sharing the voice of the user that you collect, giving some really insightful points, broadcasts the value of research, while at the same time kind of almost recruiting the people who are going to be more interested in amplifying those voices.
Exactly.
And you did that really, really well early on, and you really latched on to kind of the our the playlists and the highlight reels and the video clips. I think that was the really, really cool thing. And I think that I saw that as being part of this journey with you. I saw that happening at Lattice. It was really, really cool to see. So when you're setting this expectation, and you talked about research calendar and research roadmap. We're a huge fan of research roadmap. I think every organization needs to have a research roadmap. It's almost as important as having a product roadmap. What are the metrics that were there metrics that you had for yourself or for the team, or did your manager have a metric for you on in terms of this is what we would consider, like this is how we would measure the impact of early research happening at Lattice? Or was it more qualitative in terms of are we elevating the voice of the user? What were the kind of what were the metrics that you were dealing with or working with?
Yeah, so that measure what matters. I definitely got creative here. I don't have a perfect answer, but I'm excited to learn more about this. I think it is about getting creative and thinking about like what are all the potential metrics, or what are the things that where do you really want to provide value, and then getting creative about how you want to measure that. So very simply, like one thing that we ran this survey quarterly to understand what was the impact we were having, what was going well, and what could be improved. Like really simple, right? Like it's not like we need to over engineer. I think in the early days, there's this instinct also of like, I need to like have this really advanced way of like proving my value. It's like, okay, are people finding this valuable? Yes, no, like what could be better? So it's really having a simple survey you can send out. We also just tracked how many interviews we were having week over week, month over month. And that just became a really easy way for us to say like, are we doing research, and like, are we getting the voice of the customer into the product development process? I mean, it's simple, but it was helpful. And then what else? I mean, we also looked at things like, page views of our research reports, who responded to like emails that we sent out to the company. So, and like how often were we presenting at things like all hands and just getting ourselves in front of larger audiences. But again, I think it's really like, what is the impact that you want to have? What is the simplest way that you can measure that value, and not over engineering or getting lost in advanced metrics that don't actually tell you anything or end up being useful.
But this idea of survey, this is fascinating. I didn't know you did that, and that makes so much sense. So were you sending out these
like a Google form, Prayag, like nothing super.
No, I mean that's great. The easier, the simpler, the better, right? So were you sending out these surveys to design team, product team, everyone in the organization, exec team? Who was the audience? Who were you sending this surveys to?
Yeah, so we were sending it to product design and product management with the idea that we really wanted to understand what like people in the work were feeling and experiencing, and then being able to share that up as a way to build out our priorities. So we had both our like obviously research project priorities that were aligned with the product development process. And we also had like cross-functional initiatives and research practice initiatives. So the survey helped us to prioritize what should we focus on this quarter as it relates to that like 30% of the time that we'll have available to actually democratizing and empowering research in the company. So that became a way for us to prioritize and get buy-in around those initiatives and really make sure that the things that we were designing for our users for product design, product management were actually the right things to do.
Got it. So product design, product, so the entire PDE organization, it seems, and was the exec team also involved in these surveys, or was it was focused primarily on PDE?
So they were more the recipients of it, but then we were also having some regular conversations to more roundtable discussions to understand what the needs were. But I think that like they will, I mean, hopefully good leaders like want to support and empower their team. So it was about both like making sure we were supporting their team's needs, but also that we had a finger on the pulse of like what the business questions were for like a year-ish out, and that we had some of that on our roadmap as well.
Got it. Okay. So you're basically doing research on research, so continuing the theme of kind of studying an organization, being an anthropologist in the organization, but also kind of trying to understand the impact by both surveys, but also your own conversations with internal stakeholders, saying, hey, are we doing our job? Are you getting what you think? And then collecting metrics around like, hey, how many times is the research report viewed, and what's the engagement score, stuff like that. It's like,
yeah, exactly. And I will say that like one thing that was really important early on was that as a research team, we were extremely kind of like proactive and had that what I like to call like a fire, but like a real hunger, curiosity, interest in what's happening in the business with the teams, that we are that we're like have a doer mindset, and we're like taking what like we see like low-hanging fruit, we're able to like quickly turn that around and deliver some value. And a lot of the value and a lot of the stories that will be told in the organization, so this is like anecdotal and qualitative, but it's those moments that matter, are between 2 or 3 people, right? So really leaning into those relationships and then like elevating up those artifacts or those like little ways like toolkit or services that you can offer. And so kind of having that doer mindset, investing in those relationships, and sharing actively, broadly, bringing others into the work, making your work visible, sharing out in the open, not necessarily protecting it or like holding it close, being really transparent, having that kind of like, I'm your friendly neighborhood researcher, like, and I'm here to help. So it is that mindset and that attitude, I think, that will get you really, really far. And then obviously you want to have like the structures and the roadmap and the ways to get feedback. But I think like having that mindset first and foremost is what both you need and what you should be hiring for.
Got it. Which is a great kind of segue to my next question. So you were a research team of one for 1 or 2 for the longest time, where you recruited someone internally to become a researcher, but then you had built out this foundation where your design team could do research, where your PMs could do research. So you onboarded Marvin as part of that process. So and then you started to kind of scale the team.
Mhm.
How did that transition happen? How did you shift what was the shift in the mindset there? What was the thinking behind, hey, we're gonna go from a team of 2 to 8 in a matter of 6, 7 months, right? Like what was that mindset shift like? And what was the thought thinking process behind that?
Yeah, and I just saw a comment in the chat that I should speak slower. So apologies, I am a New Yorker at heart, and so I tend to just go. I will try to speak slower though, and thank you so much for that feedback. So in terms of, yeah, growing the team and shifting that mindset from 1 to 7 or 8, it's definitely a mindset shift. And I think that having those early researchers who are super proactive and have that like woo and kind of influence muscle allows you, if you are managing the team, to be able to step away and really double down on hiring. Something that took me a while to learn is that like hiring when you're really trying to grow is like a full-time job. So maybe most managers know that, but that was a learning for me. I'm sure you're familiar with that, Prayag. That's one. I think it is also, there's this notion of like kind of, there's people who are like pioneers, people who are like settlers, and people who are like planners. And I think acknowledging also like where you spike and where you want to lean on others. And like, so I probably self-identify most as a pioneer. And so as we started to move into the settling and planning phase, hiring people who had like more of that mindset. Another thing is that we eventually, we hired a, let's see, we started to invest more in some of those processes. We eventually, when we got to about 6, we hired an awesome research ops person, which has been an incredible journey, and probably, and she's awesome, probably another conversation. But I definitely think like being comfortable with that in terms of pioneering, just comfortable duct taping stuff together. Like you kind of just had to say, okay, we're going to duct tape V1 here and like, it's fine. And we'll go over here, rather than trying to engineer a process that's perfect, that will surely be blown up and rethought because the organization is constantly changing. Lattice was 150 when I started, now we're 750. So I really think it's important to be comfortable with good enough. And then like, as now we're starting, as we now are a team of 8, to go back, we just hired and start to iterate on things or really systematize things. We just hired a new head of research who's awesome, named Narula, and she comes from a background of like working in bigger research teams. So she's really like has that more like planner mindset, right? And so that ability to be comfortable with good enough and then go back later and recognize that the organization is going to change and it doesn't make sense to over-engineer processes early on. The other thing that's been important is like, we're now just starting to think less about kind of like specific projects and more about like cross-functional or like cross-research work. How do we collaborate more as a research team? It's kind of like, as companies grow, their PMs have to figure out how they collaborate across products, right? We as a research team are really working on building that muscle of working together, which is new when you're used to being the only researcher on everything, the only researcher in the room. So that's an exciting mindset shift for us as well. I mentioned kind of this scaling and leaning into kind of the planners on your team, and bringing more focus to our craft. Early on, like you're looking to get those case studies, those champions. So you're doing kind of fast, scrappy, actionable, agile research, which I am a huge fan of, and there's such a time and place for that. But we also want to up-level our research methods, our rigor, our tooling, to really make sure that we're delivering that unique value now that we have that foundation set.
Got it. So shift the focus from being a pioneer to let's build a team of settlers and planners. We can do this right. Initially, let's try to figure out, what's the method to do this that works right now, but then go back and fix some of those processes when you have a larger team. That's a great template for anyone kind of whose team is growing. There are a couple of questions here. I know we're getting to the end, but there are some really good questions, and I would love to get those answered. there's this question that came in about the mistakes you made, right? Like now you've gone through the journey, first researcher, 150 people, 750 people, research team of 8, the product team went from PD team went from like 30 people to hundreds of people at this point. What mistake do you think, if you were to do a do-over, what would you do different? What would you think is, what were the kind of challenges that you would go back, you wish you could go back and fix?
Yeah, this is a good one. I mean, I think a lot of what I'm sharing today is like turning the mistake into an action that hopefully y'all can take away with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think definitely coming in and having a project where you're initially really embedded with the team and having that observer mindset and making something really actionable that becomes a case study is extremely important. I think I spent a little bit of time, I spent probably too much time initially trying to do foundational work that the organization just like wasn't quite ready for, which is totally fine. And in fact, like now we're at a place where, or we are now at a place where like that kind of cross-platform research is more valuable. So I think really finding and it can be an extremely strategic project, but it is focused, there is a PM and PD who's like really hungry and in it with you. And I think that's extremely important. Another is like, yeah, just kind of not necessarily feeling like you need to go build all the things. I think there's this pressure of like, oh my God, I need to have office hours and, a learning cadence and like a like deck to share around and all these different things. I think it's like, figure out what are the 1 or 2 things that people really, really need. Do that, work on a project with high impact, and don't over engineer like all the things, because like the organization is going to continue to change. And so just being like intentional and thoughtful about like where you put your time and focus. And again, like not trying to do everything, but trying to do 2 things really well. Those are probably 2 immediate learnings that come to mind.
That's great, because one of my questions was going to be what are your kind of advice to a first research hire at a company? It seems like focusing on what is the kind of a quick wins we can get for the organization, trying to just do a few things but do them well rather than trying to build out everything. It seems like kind of the two great pieces of advice.
One more thing, Prayag, I'll just mention on that is like another
please.
takeaway is like learn, have a learning mindset, have a feedback mindset, be like, anything you put out there, get feedback on it, like be in front of people being like, what did you think of that? What would you like more of, less of? Like you have to be your own marketer, right? You're a team of one. You have to be, you're your own prioritizer, scoper, tools person. You're doing the work, you're sharing the work, you're broadcasting up and down. So there's so much, and you kind of have to be energized by that. But we are standing on the shoulders of giants. There are so many people out there who have done this before and made mistakes. And so have that Rolodex of people that you reach out to when you have a question and just like are tapping into. You're not the first one to have encountered this problem in the pioneering phase. And so I think it's really important to have that curiosity and just like not be afraid to ask.
And can people reach out to you on LinkedIn and ask questions then?
Yes, for sure. And that's a shameless plug. Please reach out to me. I'm happy to help and share what I can from my journey.
You heard it here first. Claire has been awesome in helping us, so you know her to be a very helpful person. So please reach out directly as well. There are a few tactical questions that I would love to get your take on. Actually, not so much technical question. This is a really interesting question. I should have followed up. You mentioned kind of finding people people who have done this before, people who are kind of on this journey together. How do you find mentors inside your own organization when you're the first researcher, right? Like how do you find people who you can learn from, who can teach you as you get the pulse of the organization, or how do you find that partner, that mentor?
Yeah, so I think like that you're looking to different people for different things. I think one learning is like your manager is not going to be your everything. And so being really open to having like, your manager might be great at some things, but you have others in the company who so I think like obviously culture is a big thing, like culture and how the organization learns and what have successes looked like here, how do people like to consume information, what are the best ways to win over hearts and minds. That can be really helpful to have someone who like deeply understands the culture. Another area is to have someone who's also building a cross-functional practice at the same time and going through the ups and downs. So someone who runs QA joined at the same time that I did. And we were both like the first people who were across EPD. And so we would just have regular coffee chats and I'd be like, hey, I love how you approached that like email that you sent out where you shared out your priorities. Oh, and like, she was like, I like how you had that survey. So there's a lot of, I think, or like data, right? Data is another one where you can be learning about what they're doing and how you're doing things, about how you build a practice that is horizontal in ways that your EP or D partners might not directly have experience with. So yeah, those are sort of two to three people that I definitely think.
So you can get mentorship anywhere, right? It's not the, mentorship and help and build a community with, people that are not just your immediate managers, but also new hires, other people in the organization. That's especially the story of the new hire, that makes so much sense. There are
and then external,
questions.
right? Like there's so many external resources out there, but I think again, it's just like having those pointed questions, the things you really need help with. People love to help. Like my Enneagram is helper. So, don't be afraid to ask, whether it's like there's UX research coffee chat, there's like endless resources out there. And I think it's just about being open to asking for help and asking. I sometimes am like, hey, product design, hey, PM, do you have awesome researchers you used to work at other companies? Like, can I reach out to them? I was totally shameless. And so I think it's finding people you really respect in the industry, peers that you can jam with and have chats with. And then of course, those internal people who can really help you in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, because at one point I think we were talking about, you asked me this question, hey, who are the people that you really like and respect in the research community? We talked about we talked about Hannah from Twilio and all these people. So right. It was that's yeah. And now this is also, now I am reflecting back on 2 years of friendship. I'm like, oh, it's all starting to come together. There's also one of the things that a lot of customers kind of a lot of new researchers struggle with is something kind of as tactical as recruiting, especially in a B2B company. How do you deal with that? How do you make it easy for the gatekeepers, the sales team, the customer success team? How do you make them feel comfortable helping you recruit and helping you help the rest of the team in recruiting the customers? How do you have any insights on that?
Oh my gosh, yeah, this is such a hot topic, and I don't have a perfect answer, but I think in B2B, you have a couple of things working in your favor. We have really great customer success managers at Lattice who have extremely good relationships with really senior people, like the head of HR, right? And so I think as researchers, we also need to act like kind of mini CSMs, right? And think about our research as an experience where you're both like learning from the customer, but the customer is learning about upcoming product development or understanding what other customers are doing. So I think there's opportunity to just like kind of reframe it as like an invitation to participate in an experience and less like a I like really intense IDI, like very like scientific. I mean, of course you want to maintain your craft, but you do need to make sure that they feel welcomed, and because it is ultimately a business conversation, right? So I think that helping CSMs understand that that they feel comfortable like putting you in front of the customer, frankly. And then I also think that CSMs like think about this as an exciting opportunity. The customer like really wants to talk to you. There's times when that happens. And so we really do try to lean into those relationships. And I'm trying to think, I guess like we have like templated email stuff that helps. We use Calendly, which is great. And then we also just try to like, we also find different opportunities. We have a survey we run through Pendo where we ask, are you interested in participating in future research? We get like NPS email responses from customers, and we occasionally will try to see if we can recruit that way. So we definitely get creative. You have to get creative with this, and just try to leverage what you're already doing. I think over instrumenting a recruiting process early on doesn't make a ton of sense. So it's like, okay, if the CSM manages the relationship, they're going to want to know if you're talking to the customer. And so how can you, if they're already doing a lot of scheduling with the customer, how do you kind of go through them? And then as much as you can, like once you build relationships, is there an opportunity to make that a recurring? So early on, we did some betas where we actually had weekly calls with the same group of customers, which just makes it so much easier from a setup process. So that I think is also helpful.
Got it. So don't over-engineer. Use your customer success team. Use the relationships that the company already has to recruit customers. And you made a really good point. Customers do want to talk to you. You know, you just have to get in front of them at the right time. The customers do. People who like products are really passionate about those products, and we found the same thing. It's like people want to talk to you. So you just need to find out the right connections there. We have 3 minutes in. I'm gonna do some. We'll try to say as many. There are a bunch of questions here. We'll try to take as many of those we can in the next 3 minutes.
I'll be fast.
Okay. Okay. This is an easy one. How do you build and socialize a research repository?
I don't have a good answer to that.
Well,
sorry, I do have a good answer to that. Well, so Marvin's been great for we basically have a list of our projects, playlists that are part of that. And we have each research team or each researcher has a home base for their research. And in there, they have their top research projects, links to the Marvin clips, and then what happens is the researcher shares out that with like people who are recently onboarding, or the teams can access that whenever they want. And then also we give access to pretty much everyone in the EPD org. We give them access to Marvin so that they can literally go in and search and find what they need. And it's actually like that self-serve is really great. And I find that engineering especially is really energized by like cool tools. And so they're like, yeah, and they're like going in there. So is product management. So I think it's really about like having that entry point of, hey, these are relevant projects to you. Then they're like, oh, cool, there's a Marvin link. Then they get in there and they see that they can search and find what they need. And so that's how we've approached it so far. And it's worked well. I wouldn't say you necessarily need more than that early days. I've been really satisfied, and I don't get a lot of requests for like, oh, where is our research repository?
Right. So for repository, it's Marvin, and then you've been using Notion to kind of to socialize and promote the actual data, the actual clips, the actual responses.
Yeah.
That's a good one. We'll have one last question. We won't be able to cover everything, but what did you ever worry about your sample sizes when you were doing kind of early research? Were you how did you figure out like what was a good sample size to use, especially early on when probably you had a lot of pressure of like, let's do a lot of quick projects all at once?
How to manage your sample size?
Yeah. Was there, let me rephrase that. Was there, do you think, a temptation of, hey, I'm going to just like reduce the sample size, or how did you kind of resist that temptation, or how did you kind of manage that expectation with the team?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a big fan of like thick data and the idea that like there are like a handful of stories are often representative of like a much broader pain. I will say I was lucky in that there was comfort with stories and anecdotes and qualitative data. We also would always first check in with data science and we would leverage what we already had. So we would look at the data, look at CX tickets, like you use that, right, as the place to find those pains. And then you say, okay, I'm going to talk to 10 customers, and those 10 customers represent the challenges of this like much deeper 200 ticket item, right? And so I think it's about mixing that qual and quant, leveraging the data and partners you have to build that larger sample size and confidence, but that you're really responsible for making sure that those voices are like there's depth to them, and they're really understood and internalized.
Got it. So thick data, thick and rich data is the
And
answer.
leverage your
Well,
partners for quant.
and leverage your partners for quant. Love it. Well, thank you so much. That's all the time we had, folks. I know we were not able to get to all the questions, but we'll try to follow up. Thank you so much, Claire. This was so educational. Thank you so much for your time and effort. People, please reach out to me, reach out to Claire directly if you have any questions. We'll hopefully do another follow on and have you back on. But this has been an enlightening conversation. Thank you so much, Claire, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Prayag. Thanks, Marvin team. We really appreciate you. And thanks for everyone who joined the call today.